Hey everyone, welcome back to another driving review video here on the channel. Today you find me in the 2025 Nissan Frontier SL four-wheel drive long bed, which as you might know for 2025, Nissan made the long bed available across every single trim level for this generation of vehicle. As usual, we're gonna start with my acceleration test, full throttle. Not too shabby. So under the hood of the 2025 Frontier, you're going to find the 3.8 liter naturally aspirated V6 paired to a 9-speed torque converted automatic transmission. Now, if you'd follow the Frontier, you'll know that this engine and powertrain dates back to the 2020 Frontier in the last generation that replaced the outgoing 4-liter naturally aspirated V8 or V6, excuse me. That has been a little bit long in the tooth. I think a lot of people were very interested and excited for this new 3.8 V6 to replace that old 4-liter. I assume it gets a little bit better fuel economy and is rated at 310 horsepower and 281 pound-feet of torque, which is very competitive for a naturally aspirated V6 engine. And in terms of the midsize truck segment, there's really only two midsize trucks that I can think of off the top of my head that still offer a V6 like this, and that's going to be this Frontier and that of the Jeep Gladiator, which, you know, may or may not be cross-shopped with certain configurations of the Frontier. Now, I was very excited when Nissan gave me the opportunity to get behind the wheel of this truck for a full week because, you know, given the fact that I've spent pretty much a full week with most of the midsize trucks, this one stood out to me for that powertrain in particular, and I really don't have that much experience or time behind the wheel of the Frontier ever in any of their generations. So I thought, you know, in terms of getting a well-rounded viewpoint of this segment, it's one of them that I have the most experience with, and I thought this was a great opportunity. But before we get into talking about that, let's go ahead and start off with the usual visibility interior before we touch on some of the other details that you know, I find a little bit problematic or, you know, not so positive about the Frontier in comparison to some of its competition. Now, go ahead and doing a normal acceleration here with this V6 engine. It is a totally different driving experience because a lot of the competition has gone to turbocharged 4 cylinders and or 6 cylinders, which just have a ton of torque on tap down low. I think the V6 does a pretty good job, you know, with the torque and the gear ratios that it has available for acceleration, you know, between 2,500, 3,500 RPMs. But certainly if you do want full performance, you do have to wring this engine and powertrain out. Now, in terms of visibility, this is actually pretty good for this truck. I have the seat in its lowest position, and looking over the front of the vehicle, I can see a good amount of the hood, and forward visibility is pretty good. You have, you know, sizable A-pillars, but they're not super large. They are, you know, pillar or higher door-mounted mirrors, so you have a little bit of visibility underneath the mirror, believe it or not. And the mirrors themselves are pretty good, usable size, larger than that of the Chevy Colorado, which I did do a full comparison video with. Make sure you guys check that out if you guys are curious. But looking over your shoulder, you do have a pretty chunky B-pillar with a grab handle for the rear seat occupants. Not too bad in visibility. I can actually see out the rear glass looking over this direction. Looking over my shoulder that way, again, the B and C pillar are there, but you do have blind spot detection, which helps out a little bit. And then in terms of rearward visibility, unfortunately, the second row headrests do not fold down, so they do stand out in the glass itself. But overall, I think the mirror is the limitation in terms of how much you can see out of the back glass, not so much of the actual, you know, rear glass space itself. Now, in terms of ride quality in the Frontier, this is an interesting one because it certainly drives very truck-like in the fact that it's kind of a stiffer, firmer riding vehicle. It's not super soft, not super plush. Major bumps and imperfections of road do kind of, you know, move the truck around a little bit, especially at the back end. And as we head into my bumpy section of road, I think the ride quality was overall a little bit disappointing, at least comparing it again to some of the other, you know, mid-sized trucks that might be a little bit newer in their current generations. So as we, you know, head over these bumps, I think the truck handles it well. It's pretty well damped. Given this one does have the longer wheelbase and the long, you know, bed configuration, that might inherently have a little bit more twist of the frame or just the components in general, which means you can feel the back end kind of moving a little bit independently or semi-independently from that of the rest of the vehicle or the front cab. I would just say it's not the best, softest, most compliant midsize truck currently offered that I've tested here on the channel, but it's not bad by any means. It's just a little bit more truck-like, not so much SUV and car-like, versus that maybe of the Ford Ranger even, or the Chevy Colorado as well. Now, as we drive here down this city street, taking a look at some of the interior items that I did just mention, of course, I think my biggest issue on the interior is, number one, the seat discomfort. These seats are not comfortable for my body type and don't offer enough adjustability, I think, to be competitive in this segment or for a lot of other, average size adults out there. So I do have spinal fusion. This was something that when I was driving the Murano and Armada at their technical center, they, really wanted my opinion on these zero gravity seats inside of those vehicles. And I'm happy to say I had zero complaints with the adjustability and seat comfort of those. Now here in the Frontier, unfortunately, they're just a black leather seat, 6-way power with additional 2-way lumbar. And these are some of the, I'm just gonna say, worst seats I've sat in terms of comfort. I have discomfort while driving this vehicle within 4 or 5 minutes of driving it, and I'm already not wanting to stay behind the wheel of this truck just due to the shape and the overall comfort that these seats provide. Now, one of the other attributes I noticed about them is it seems like the seat bottom is a little bit on the narrower side, so it feels like I'm sitting on top of the side bolsters and not so much in the middle of the seat where the side bolsters are kind of keeping me, hugged in place in the center. It feels like I'm partially sitting on top of the actual bolsters itself. So that is by far one of the biggest negatives I have. Now, for 2025, Nissan was kind enough to give us an updated infotainment system, 12.3 inch in size, with wireless Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, and this very well matches a lot of their other more recently updated products. And I think the infotainment system and the Fender premium audio system are two of the highlights on the interior in terms of positive things. I think the dedicated subwoofer and the audio system sound actually quite good, a little bit better than that of the Chevy Colorado's Bose audio in my opinion. And this bright, vivid infotainment system with extremely quick to connect wireless Android Auto has worked flawlessly. And believe it or not, we're actually in a severe weather alert here in the next half hour or so, and that has been popping up on the screen alerting me that that is incoming, which is always nice to see. If you're in the middle of an unfamiliar location or don't know what's going on with the environment around you, that will notify you up here on the dashboard, which is awesome. Now, of course, Sirius XM, AM, FM, USB, Bluetooth inputs as well. Has Frontier spelled out just below the infotainment system, just in case you forgot you were in a Frontier, which I'm not sure how many people out there, will forget that, but that is here on the dash for their design and aesthetics. And using the engine stop-start system right there at that light, it's not the smoothest engine stop-start. It's kind of on par with some of the others in this segment. Kind of is what it is, but the engine stop-start button, I don't really like it. And there is a button to disable it just next to the push-button start location. Now, in terms of some of the other interior attributes, you have a 7-inch LCD display in between the two analog gauge clusters, and this display does not match this display at all in terms of colors, brightness, and overall crispness, if you will. It's actually a little bit hard to see with sunglasses on and bright sunny conditions. Right now, it's not the worst thing in the world, but it's certainly not bright enough in my opinion and doesn't match the overall display over here, like I said, that was recently updated for 2025. Now, this display in the cluster is actually extremely configurable, however, and allows you to put a lot of different information on that screen, including your current speed readout. You have auxiliary gauges, you have off-road menus. You can put of course, your trip information, odometer, fuel economy. Android Auto media shows up in here. There's really a lot of different information you can put up here, including your driver assistance systems. So I really do like this display and the customization that has to offer. I just think the actual display itself is unfortunately a little bit dull, a little bit lower resolution, and could be updated in terms of the actual LCD itself. Now, turning it on here to the interstate, go ahead and wait for this van. And, handling of this truck is obviously not a priority by any means, but it is a little bit, I don't want to say sloppy in its handling because, most midsize trucks aren't super compliant or, targeted to be, performance machines. It holds its own. It has a haptic feedback steering wheel. that does alert you if you go over the line and you don't have your turn signal enabled, but getting up to speed there, you can see it was not a problem. Just a minor amount of body roll, typically to be expected. And activating cruise control is very easy. You simply have an on and off button here on the right side, press it down, and we are activated now here at 70 miles an hour. And this vehicle, unfortunately, to my knowledge, only has the basic lane departure warning system and does not actually have an active lane keeping assist systems or lane centering system, which is quite unfortunate. Now, it does, however, have a radar adaptive cruise control, which you can adjust the distance right here between, it looks like 4 different preset distances. So as we approach this truck in front of us, it will go ahead and pick up that and then match that vehicle's speed, just like, normal adaptive cruise works. But overall, I think the driver assistance tech is just a little bit behind the times in terms of what is starting to be offered, at least in some of the other competition. Taking a look at road noise, I think this again is on average. It's a little bit windy outside as we have some weather inbound in the next half hour or so. You hear a little bit of road noise coming up from the tires itself. The wind noise isn't all that bad, and I think if you have the audio system turned on and turned up, most people find it acceptable for a truck like this one. Now, as we go around this off-ramp here, one of the items I also want to mention and touch on is the power steering assist and just how firm it is inside this truck. Now, if I'm not mistaken, it has a hydraulically assisted power steering rack, which is a little bit of an older technology. Most of them gone to fully electric, lighter power steering systems. Now, I think there are some benefits to have a hydraulically assist. It gives a little bit more feedback and engagement to that of the driver. But at lower speeds especially, it's just a little bit too firm for my overall preference. And I would like to see it just feel a little bit lighter, just to make the overall driving experience seamless in its operation. When I get inside a new vehicle, I don't want to feel like I'm having to work to drive the thing. I want it to just be cohesive in its nature. And I think the power steering is just a bit too firm and a little bit too stiff, again, especially at those lower speeds, for what I prefer while driving. Now, you guys out there might prefer a more stiffer feel, and I think the the Frontier actually gives you that feel. Now, continuing on with some of the rest of the interior, the Frontier has a very analog physical button type interior, which means some of the switchgear seems like it's from about 15 to 20 years ago, including the windows and power lock unlock here on the driver's side. The steering wheels are pretty nice, as the newer Nissan logo in the center, and then you have a lot of updated controls for your HVAC and heated seats, heated steering wheel, things like that down here in the center console area. And I like how open the interior feels. I think the lack of a center console or a tall center console gives you more an open spaciousness feel in the center. I like that. I like the wireless charging and where it's located and how large the area is. I like the sunroof that's standard on the SL trim levels, but I think it's it does feel a little bit dated in some regards when you start to compare it to some of those vehicles I mentioned, the Chevy Colorado and Ford Ranger, the two big ones that come to mind, in that those just offer a slightly more modern take on interiors. And although I like some attributes from the Frontier and some attributes from those two trucks, I don't think this is a terrible experience. It's just kind of a personal preference as to how everything is laid out. If you like all these physical buttons, knobs, and switchgear versus some of those controls being integrated to the electronic touchscreens or infotainment systems on the other two vehicles. Now, taking a look at the second row of the Frontier, the back seat of this truck actually has a decent amount or competitive amount of space, but the seat backs themselves are more upright than that of particularly Chevy Colorado, and I would lead that to believe the Ford Ranger as well. So comfort's not amazing in the second row, but it's not the worst either. I have a couple inches of legroom, couple inches of headroom. You of course have the manual sliding rear window. All of that is, average, competitive set for this, space inside the cabin. Now, the one attribute that I mentioned earlier on in this video that is somewhat unique is the fact that you can get a 5-foot or 6-foot bed configuration on all trim levels of the Nissan Frontier for 2025. Some of the other midsize competition only let you get the long bed on certain trim levels or certain cab configurations. Other ones don't even offer a long bed at all, including the GM, twin sister vehicles. So you know, that's, I think, is a positive of the Frontier. And I think another real positive of the Frontier is going to be its price point. If you don't want to spend over $50,000 for a fully loaded midsize truck, then the Frontier can be had in either the Pro 4X or this SL variant, fully loaded, for under that price point. I think that is really where I'm finding the value in the Frontier versus the current offerings from GM, Ford, and Toyota that all exceed well over $50,000 for their fully loaded configured trucks. And the Frontier has tested $47,750 with that naturally aspirated V6 underneath the hood. Seems like a reasonable value proposition if you are okay with some of the other attributes that I've been mentioning throughout this video. Towing capacity just under 7,000 pounds, as seen here with the long bed. Goes up to about 7,100 pounds in a short bed, properly configured trim level. Unfortunately, it does not have an integrated trailer brake controller here in the cabin, so you're going to have to add an aftermarket one. Does, however, have a 2-speed 4-wheel drive transfer case, which is a positive. Has standard front skid plate here in the SL 4-wheel drive, which is also another benefit that you might have to pay from that of some of the competition. And yeah, I think, overall, I'm coming away from the Frontier with a sense of both positive and negative, certainly, but I'm coming away with a couple key highlights, but maybe not so much of a well-rounded package versus the other trucks in the segment. I think this generation came out in the 2022 model year, so I think it's already starting to show its age a little bit. I think the refresh for 2025, including this infotainment system, will certainly help. I think the naturally aspirated V6 is a benefit and a highlight to those that want this particular powertrain, but driving some of the other trucks, I think, just gives me a better, well-rounded, cohesive experience. Those are newer generation vehicles, and I think the turbocharged powertrains is the one that I would certainly want on a daily basis to give it a more effortless, feel behind the wheel. So I think that is basically where I'm going to leave this video. If you guys are curious about fuel economy that I've been seeing according to the information here on the computer, I've been seeing about 14 to 15 mpg in pure city type of driving. That's about the most interstate I've done here with the driver assistance tech in this video. And yeah, I think, overall is what it is. Not a bad truck, not necessarily top front runner either, in my opinion. I think the styling's pretty good. I think that's basically all I have to say about it. So if you guys enjoyed this video and or found something helpful, make sure to hit that like button below, subscribe if you haven't already. I want to give a huge thanks to Nissan for sending the Frontier out for me to test, review, and get a more comprehensive overall experience with it, because I will be creating some midsize truck comparison videos, at least from the ones that I have driven and spent time with. And I think at different price points, it'll be a different opinion, at least in my opinion, for which one that I might recommend, depending on your wants, needs, and overall perspective of powertrains available across the board. So let me know what you guys think of the Nissan Frontier in 2025 model year down in the comment section below. Which configuration do you think is a better value, or which one would you buy if you were in the market for a midsize truck? As we start to head inside the rain, we'll go ahead and flip on the headlights. And yeah, I appreciate continued support here on the channel. Once again, huge thanks to Nissan for sending the vehicles out for me to test and review. And of course, you guys for continuing to watch and support the channel. And with all that being said, I hope to see you guys in the next one.